Hi everyone, and welcome to our second video cast of the social psych unit. Today we're going to focus on not the way that you think about others, but the way that you influence others and the way others influence you. So we're going to talk about social influence, and we're going to focus specifically on groups, individuals, and situations. So first thing, right? Social influence is a change in your behavior caused by actual or imagined pressure. So the idea that someone would have social influence on you means that they would cause you to change your behavior. And like I said, it comes from individuals, groups, or situations. So what are the different ways groups can influence you, right? The first thing when you think about with group influence is the idea of conformity, right? That you change your behavior to match the group, right? The group puts some sort of pressure on you to match them or be like them in some way. It doesn't always have to be real though, conformity like standing ovations, there's not a real pressure there, but you kind of feel the pressure. So there was a famous study done in order to measure really how far you could push conformity, right? And what it takes to make someone conform even when they know it's wrong. And this guy, Solomon Asch, he did this with a line experiment. So what he wanted to illustrate was the power of the group in making someone conform. So here's the experiment, right? You have the participant over here, and he doesn't know what's going on. All of these guys are acting like they're participants, but really they're not. They're in on the experiment. It's called a confederate, okay? So the only one who doesn't know what's going on is this guy, right? And what he's asked, what they're all asked to do is choose the correct line. So they're shown this one, and they have to pick which one matches. It seems very obvious, right? But of course what's going to happen is that all of these guys are purposely going to say the wrong one to see if he'll say it too, okay? So the naive subject, this guy, often gave the wrong answer just to conform. So if they were told to say it was 1, right, he would say, this guy would say 1, even though he knew it was wrong, because all the other guys had said 1. And 1/3 of the subjects conformed to the wrong answer, even though they knew it was the wrong answer. And at least 67% conformed at least once, okay? So what causes this, right? Conformity increases when there's 3 or more people in the group, right? What they found is that 3 or more is the magic number. 2, the difference between 2 people saying the wrong line and 3 mattered. But then once 3, 4, 5, it didn't matter. So you need at least 3 people. The group is unanimous, right? So if everybody in the group says the same thing, even if it's a small group of 3, that's, everyone, agrees, that makes it stronger. And the group is a high status, so you don't want to look bad in front of them, okay? And the reason why you conform is because of normative social influence. So this is the idea that you want to gain approval of others, and you also want to accept other people's opinions and okay, I don't know, I guess they must know what they're talking about, okay? So how else can groups influence us? First thing is social facilitation, right? Social facilitation is the idea that people perform stronger when they're around others. And a big way that we always show this is the home advantage. So when you're playing at home, you have all of your fans around you, and teams play better. Another example of this is drivers. They drive. It's 15 seconds. It takes them 15 seconds less to drive 100 yards when someone is next to them. So when there's someone next to them at the stoplight, they're more likely to go faster off the line than if no one's there, okay? And what they find is that this is true the majority of the time, but actually what it is that an audience strengthens the response that's most likely. So if you're good at something, the audience will make you better. But if you're not good at something, the audience will make you worse. And that's that Yerkes-Dodsey's law, right? You need the maximum or the optimal arousal to do your best job. Social loafing, right? We all know what that is. Don't be a social loafer. No one likes them. That's the end of it. Okay, next. De-individuation, okay? So de-individuation is when you think about the word individual here, okay? When you're an individual, you are yourself. No one's like you. You're unique, right? So de-individuation is taking away that weakness, right? Just like when you give, you make yourself like someone else, or you make yourself blend in, right? So what happens is, what they find is that in a large group, people lose their sense of self, and they forget that they're different from everyone else, and they go crazy. That the anonymity or being able to be invisible in the group makes them lose all self-restraint, and this is how riots happen, because in the group they don't, they just go crazy, whereas no one by themselves would go running around and jump on cars and smash in windows. People don't do that by themselves, right? But all of a sudden in a riot, everyone's doing it and it seems normal. So that's why de-individuation. You lose your individuality and act, with no restraint. You act more aggressively and angry. Okay, groupthink. This is kind of like it sounds. It's when the group causes you to think in a certain way, right? So it's when you really, the thinking, you want to be with everyone. Like, you want everyone to get along, right? You're in a group, you want everyone in the group to get along. So instead of saying what you think might be true, you just go along with everyone else, right? It's the desire for harmony when you make a decision, so you don't like add in your little 2 cents, right? So if you're trying to make a decision about where to go to dinner and everyone says this place, but you know it's really bad, you've been there, it's disgusting, you don't say anything because you don't want to be the one that like tells them it's all disgusting and then they're all mad at you, okay? So people self-censor themselves not to be the odd one out or cause any drama or problems. And actually, a lot of times people do this when they're factually right? They actually do know something, but it makes them unpopular, and so they don't want to do it, right? And the best example of this that kind of in our society is the Challenger explosion. So these astronauts went up into space on this space shuttle, and some of the mechanics knew that there was something wrong with the space shuttle, but instead of saying anything and speaking up, they kept their mouth shut because it was going to be aired on television, and they didn't want the producers and everyone to get mad at them for spoiling like the TV time and all of this stuff that they'd set up for the production, because there was going to be a teacher going into space and all these kinds of things, right? And then they died, all of them, okay? The next one is group polarization. And the way I like to think about this is when I think about poles, I think about the North Pole and the South Pole. So group polarization is when maybe if you feel like you're in the middle, you're at the equator, right? You're at the middle, you don't really know how you feel about something, or maybe you're a little above, you kind of like it, you kind of don't like it. When you're in a group of people who feel the same way as you do, you become much stronger in your opinion, either like or dislike. So, in a group that agrees or opposes the same idea, when you talk about it, you're going to develop a stronger opinion. So maybe you only were kind of against abortion or something. You weren't really sure, you kind of didn't like it, and then you get into a group of people who all don't like abortion. By the end, you're like, oh my God. Same exact thing if you agree with abortion and people who agree with abortion. People become more racist when they're surrounded by racist people, okay? And I'll talk about the Gerardo Rivera show in class. Remind me. It's a really great story. So, bystander effect, right? You may have learned about this in sociology if you took it. Bystander effect is the idea that in a group, right, group influence, people are less likely to help when someone's in trouble. Okay, and the example that we have, the famous example, is Kitty Giovisi. She's this bartender in New York, and she is raped and stabbed outside her apartment. The guy comes back 3 separate times. She's screaming. 38 people in the apartment admitted to hearing her scream, turning on the lights, whatever, but none of them called the police. And, everyone was like, oh my God, this is disgusting. How could people do this? I would never. And guess what? Turns out most people act the same way, right? It's why no one gets involved when, there's this example of on the subway, right? This one guy, it was in New York City, this one guy attacked another guy, and everyone on the train just sat there and didn't get involved. And then I actually saw someone go over and steal the guy's phone who was getting attacked. And I was like, ooh, that's crazy, okay? But it's something about you don't want to, well, first of all, you feel like everybody else will do something, right? And that's called the diffusion of responsibility. And you don't want to get involved. You don't want to put yourself out there to get involved. It's like the example is if you ever take a Red Cross training, if you see someone and you need someone to call 911, you have someone you have to do breathing with or whatever, you're supposed to say so-and-so, right? So you would say Vilamir Ramachandran, call 911, right? You don't just say call 911 because then everyone's like, oh, he'll call, or no, he'll call, and then no one calls. So you have to be specific, right? So multiple bystanders does not equal multiple helpers. There is not safety in numbers, right? That's false. So, when you think about it, what are things that would increase someone's chances of getting help? If they look like you, if they're attractive, if they, if you know them, if you're having a good day, a lot of things could influence whether or not you'd help them, but a group is not one of them. Okay, obedience is a change in response to one figure. So those were groups, and this is how an individual can influence you. And normally they have to be an authority figure, someone that has some sort of power over you for whatever reason. The guy that did a study on the authority figures and the power of obedience is Stanley Milgram. Okay, he did a shock experiment. And what he did is that he wanted to see if ordinary people could be convinced to do something obedient that was bad just because they were told to, right? So what he does is he have teachers that he brought in teachers, and he, people who he made teachers, and they were told to shock this learner in another room if they did not answer the question correctly. So they were like testing them, and he said that they were testing the effect of punishment. So if they got it wrong, they would get punished by a shock, and then maybe that would like make them get it right the next time. Okay, so they're going to shock people in another room if they get the answer wrong. Right? So the question here is like, what would you do, right? How high would you shock? How high would you go, right? And think about it. This guy in the other room, surprisingly enough, right, you can actually hear him screaming. You can hear him screaming, help me, oh, my heart hurts, I don't like it, stop, I want to stop, right? And the guy in the lab coat behind you says, please continue, you must go on. And people just keep going up the scale. 2 out of 3 people went all the way to 450 volts. It's like danger, extreme shock, right? No one thought that this would happen. Psychiatrists predicted that like only the really rare people in society would go all the way. That 0 people, they said, 0 to 1 people would go all the way, right? But guess what? Way more than that, okay? No one stopped before 300 volts. So again, the same thing. They thought that, you know, less than 20% of people would even make it past 150, but no one stopped before 300. Okay, and they actually did this experiment a couple different times. They changed some of the conditions in the experiment. So they had one time the teacher had to actually sit in the room with the person they were shocking and put their hand on the shock thing, and then the obedience went down because they feel responsible, right? If they're in the same room, it's down but still up a little bit. So you see, you know, 40% only did the minimum shock or the maximum shock. Different rooms, but you can see and hear them. So in the original, they could just hear, but then they could see. You're only at 60. Different rooms see, but not here. You're at a little bit higher, you know, 65, 70, right? So you can manipulate some things to change whether or not people obey an authority figure. Okay, so when are you going to obey? When you separate the task from the pain. So like you don't have to see them, you don't have to hear them, that kind of thing, okay? If you're getting paid, you're like, oh, I'm getting paid for this, I should do it, right? And this is, again, cognitive dissonance, right? If someone's paying you for it, and if you're accepting the money, it must mean you want to do it. Actions, attitudes follow actions. The situation is prestigious, right? So it's like, ooh, you know, I'm at Yale versus like I'm in some weird building that has like broken out windows in the middle of a dark alley. Repetitive escalation of the task. So you don't ask someone, right, to shock at 450 volts right away. You start at like 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Ready? Okay? This is the idea of the foot in the door. You ask for a little thing first, the big thing next. Okay? So we see here, connecting back to what you already learned. And the trust and responsibility is given to the authority figure. Same thing with bystander effect, but instead of giving the responsibility to the group, you give it to the authority figure. Oh, it's not my, like I'm not doing this. Like he's telling me to keep going, not me. I don't, you know, whatever. Last, how does the situation influence you, right? So more about the environment around you. This is an example of the role playing that I also talked about in thinking, right? How a certain role can change the way you think. So the certain role can change the way you think, which sometimes changes the way you act, or the way you act in the role changes the way you think about the role, right? So the thinking and the acting. And so you want to change your behavior to fit the role that you think it's supposed to be. So what he did is Phil Zimbardo, this is Count Dracula guy, decided to set up a prison in the bottom of Stanford University. And he wanted to see if he could get people to be like, you know, corrupted. Basically, it's going to be like there's going to be guards and prisoners, and he's going to see what happens if people become evil, you know, based on the circumstance, okay? And what they found is that very, very quickly, the inmates and the guards followed the role, to the point where the inmates were having nervous breakdowns and crying, and they didn't even ask to leave. They were doing everything the guards told them to. The guards were yelling at them, making them do push-ups, doing all these things to them that were really kind of mean and sadistic, right? Nothing physical because they couldn't harm them physically, but all this mental stuff. And it really took over, right? And they actually had to end the experiment like after 6 days, and this was going on for 2 weeks, because that's how traumatic it was to the prisoners, because they really believed that they had no way to get out of the situation. They were in prison. So situational factors can be very powerful. When bad things happen, it's not bad people, but the bad situation that creates all of these different influences that brings out a side of you, a role in you that you might not otherwise have done. All right? So that's all for now, AP Psychos, and remember, psychology is flippin' awesome.